Today we are continuing from where we left off on Friday. So today we are trying to complete chapter 10. Today our focus is going to be on how to get a valid survey and also learn some of the things that can go wrong in sampling and also some of the things that can go wrong in a sampling design. So a valid survey yields the information you are seeking about the population you are interested in. So how are we going to get a valid survey? Before we start any survey, it is very important that we answer these following questions. What do you want to know? For example, if I want to conduct a survey in this class, what is my focus? Do I want to know their study habits, their heights, their age? Does that make sense? You'd have to be able to ask yourself, your goal, what do you want to know? And then you should also ask yourself, are you asking the right respondents? So, for example, the university wants to ask students about how they feel about Upstate. And then the university decides maybe some of the respondents are locals. The goal is about students. Is that okay? So you should be able to ask the students at the school. Does that make sense? So it's very important that what you ask the right respondents. And then you should also make sure that you're asking the right questions. The right questions that is going to help you achieve your goal. Does that make sense? If I want to know the study habit of students in this class, it doesn't make sense for me to even ask them about their age. Does that make sense? You have to be able to ask the right questions that is going to lead you to your objectives or your goal. You should also ask yourself what you will do with the answers if you have them. How are you going to analyze them? How are these answers going to address the things you wish you knew? So these are some of the questions that you need to ask yourself before you put out a survey. And also to get a valid survey, several things must happen. And some of the things that must happen is that, one, you should ask specific questions. And then also you should use the right sampling frame. It's the same as asking the right respondents. And then also you should be able to understand what you want to learn and how you are going to go about it. And then also when possible, you should also try to ask quantitative problems. For example, it is better to ask how many magazines did you read last week? That way they could say 1, 0, 2, 3, than saying how much do you read? That is a bit not so clear. And then you say a lot, a moderate, little. So it's better to be able to ask quantitative questions whenever possible. You should also be careful in phrasing your questions because if your questions are not clear enough, it means that the respondent might not be able to understand or may understand the questions differently than what you intend to get. Does that make sense? So it's very important that you frame your questions properly. You should also do whatever possible you can to reduce bias because we've already studied that bias, we are trying to what? Reduce bias as much as we can. You should also identify the population and select the best sample frame you can. And then you should also spend time and resources. That way, that is going to also help reduce bias. Imagine that I live in Washington and I want to conduct a survey on presidential results, and I decide to only speak to people in Washington. That is going to be a bit biased. It will be more prudent that you spend resources and go to other states and then try to speak with respondents or voters there. That is going to help your survey to be more credible. So these are some of the common sampling mistakes. The first one is sample volunteers. So when people just voluntarily decide to respond to your survey. And then usually voluntary response is often biased towards those with strong opinions or those who are strongly motivated. The other one is convenience sample. Convenience sample means that, for example, if I want to get something about this class, I decide to talk to this guy because he's the one that is closer to me. Is that okay? So that is convenience sampling. So like you simply include individuals who are convenient to your sample. So usually like people you just meet and those kind of stuffs. And then also choosing a bad sampling frame. So for example, you want to know more about maybe medical doctors in Boone, and then you decide to speak to those whose hospitals are on the arts. It's a bad sampling frame because then you're only going to get medical doctors who are on the maybe on the adverts, but there are also doctors here who are also not on advertisements too. So it's very important that you avoid choosing a bad sampling frame because when you do that, that is going to introduce biasness. And then whenever you also to also avoid that, also there is also undercoverage. Undercoverage occurs when some group is not sampled or is less sampled frequently than the okay. If you want to get more responses about students in this university and decide to speak to only freshmen or juniors, there are seniors, there are other people too that it's very important that you also include them in your survey. So you should try to avoid undercoverage. And then the last one is non-response bias. And then some of the common sampling design mistakes. If you are, so usually when you want to conduct a survey, sometimes you try to also maybe hand out a sheet of paper for the respondents to answer. When your design is very long, it becomes boring and people will choose not to respond. So it's very important that you keep your survey as shorter as possible. Maybe probably less than 10 questions would be good. And then also response bias. If there is anything in the survey that influences the responses, so you should also try to avoid that. And then you should always look for biases and also report your methods in detail. This is all for chapter 10. Let's try some of your homework problems. So let's try question 7. So I want you to read question 7 and tell me the answer you think is the best for the problem.
The compounding variable of having somebody answer in front of a crowd.
So what do you think it is?
D.
D. Okay. So he's saying D. Anybody else? Okay, so we have D and then A. Anybody else? Why do you think you'd go for A?
So like you're asking like why we don't think this is a good idea, correct? Like the way they're going about it, or cases what problems through this plan?
Mm-hmm.
I would think that like most people are gonna be a little less likely to want to like raise their hand up right in front of the people who pay their paycheck and stuff and be like, I'm unhappy here. So it may become biased because the only people who are gonna want to raise their hands are the ones that are happy with what's going on there
Okay.
and don't feel any sort of like negative emotion towards raising their hand in front of their supervisors.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Gabriela, what do you think?
Bias, I get really rich. Like, I don't know, I just thought about it like as myself, and then I was like thinking about the samples from the other class, so I was like, if there's bias, you can have an accurate result, that's like something you can depend on, because it would be skewed in a way. So like, I think it's like, once you read it, it's all kind of obvious that it would be that way.
Okay. Abby, what do you think? Okay. Do you raise your hand?
Realize own bias because you are in a room with your boss, your job is on the line. If you say that you are not happy with your situation properly.
Okay. Do you all agree? Okay. So let's see. Yeah, so A is the right answer because the question is saying that the company plans to have human resource manager of each corporate division hold a meeting of the employees to ask whether they are happy on their jobs. They will ask people to speak out loud. That is the problem, and indicate whether they are happy. So that way there is no confidentiality. Is that okay? People's responses needs to be very confidential. So usually in surveys, we try to avoid names or details or that is going to expose somebody. Is that okay? So that is a good choice. Let's get to 15. Anybody wants to try A?
gas mileage for the last 7 Phillips of his car.
Why?
Because when you're reading it says like the time frame is the last 7 Phillips of his car, and like the other two options are his car and time models of that car, and that doesn't accurately represent what's being said. And then it shows that overall it appears that his car gets 26.1 miles per gallon, and that's after he's written it down a few times, so that would be mean.
Okay. Anybody else? Julie, what do you think?
I agree, so then sample mean. And then also the gas mileage for the last 7.
Okay. So I also do agree with what they have said, because when you read, it says that when Nate fills his car with gas, he figures out how many miles per gallon his car got. He wrote down the results after 4 fill-ups in the past few months. So overall, it appears that his car gets 27.2 miles per gallon. So like on average, right? So he calculated the sample mean of the gas mileage for. So when you look at the answers, his car, all cars of that make and model, no, of the last 4 fill-ups of his car. So what do you think is the right one? Is it his car or the last 4 fill-ups? The last 4 fill-ups. Because that is the data he used in getting the mean, isn't it? Let's get to B. Who would volunteer? B, question 15.
Show us the population of gas mileage.
Okay. So, do you agree that here is going to be population mean? You all agree with that? Okay. Of the gas mileage for. Okay. And then C says results may be biased because. Okay. So driving conditions may not be typical. Why don't you think the price of fuel is always changing? Why don't you think that should be the answer? Good. That has nothing to do with gas mileage. Is that okay? He's not focused on the price, he's just trying to get the gas mileage. Is that okay? Does that make sense? So that's a good response. May not be because this is just like 4 fill-ups. So if you want to, you have to like maybe do it like over a long time to have winter seasons, summer seasons, days you'd have long trips and everything like that. Yeah. So this is the EPA. So the EPA is the Environmental Protection Agency. So what will the EPA be trying to do? You all buy cars, and whenever you buy a car, most of the time you'd have information about the car. You'd know the car consumes this average miles per gallon and all that. Those informations were given by the EPA. So what is the EPA trying to estimate? The population mean. Is that okay? Of the gas mileage. Yes, of all cars of that make and model. So you know that when I buy a Toyota Corolla, it's more efficient than having a 4Runner, right? Because when you check the EPA, you see that the mileage per gallon is better than that of a 4Runner. So And then let's get to 19. Mhm.
Something that is not appropriate, this method will probably result in undercoverage of those doctors who do not purchase Yellow Pages ad.
Why do you think it's A?
Because it's not looking at like, it's not random. Like in a way, like if not every doctor in the town purchased that ad and you're doing it off of 50 random, locally, like doctors, and it's just not, like, it doesn't seem right.
Okay. Adeline, what do you think?
I thought it was C at first, but after hearing what she said, I think A makes more sense. Cause it's not like the doctors aren't responding, it's like they didn't get a chance to respond. If they didn't purchase the Yellow Page ad.
Do you all agree with that? Yeah. So this is under coverage because it means that if I'm not on that ad, you're not going to talk to me. Is that okay? So then that is true. Let's do one more. Let's try to see. Oh, it's incomplete. Let me see. So I have to hit continue. Okay. So let's do B now. Anybody wants to try?
Like between A and, or not, or yeah, A and D.
Okay, so you are between A and D.
Yes, because I could kind of see both of those. Now, like with D, I do feel like even though it's like worded negative, the question, it is like a question like people might want to know. But then again, I could see like people not wanting to answer it completely truthfully because they're admitting to something like negative about their profits and their business. But then with A, it does just say they randomly select like a page from the Yellow Pages and call every business listed there. Now, like, I don't know how many businesses are on one page of that, but I could see how that would result in under coverage as well.
Okay,
So I'm kind of between those two.
okay. Anybody else?
I think it's A because it says under coverage and there's nothing about bias within the question, so that's just taking it to like a different field that it doesn't.
Okay. Anybody else? Anybody else wants to try? Okay. Why do you think it's A?
I think it's similar to the first question where,
this sample is gonna result in the undercoverage or something.
Okay. So let's do it together. So the question says that we want to know what percentage of local businesses anticipate a decrease in profits in the upcoming month. That is our goal. Is that okay? We randomly select a page in the yellow pages and call every businesses listed there. And then A says the sampling method is not appropriate because will result in it will contain listings for only one or two businesses, resulting in undercoverage. And then B says it's appropriate, and then C says it's not appropriate. Not every business will answer the phone, resulting in non-response bias. And then D says that it's also not appropriate. The method will result in a response bias since the question is worded in a negative way. So I would go with A because when we talk about a response bias means that a problem, a question in the survey that is going to influence respondents to lie. Is that okay? But here, we don't even know the questions they're asking, but we know the goal. Does that make sense? We know that we want to find what percentage of local businesses anticipate a decrease in profit. That is our objective. Is that okay? But we are not privileged to know the questions in the survey. Is that okay? That is going to cause a response bias. And so A would be the best answer because it means that if your business is not listed in the yellow pages ads, you won't be called. Does that make sense? Yep. So that is all for this chapter.